I've been trying to think of how to start a YouTube channel for a while now. I have a lot of self-doubt, so normally I just can't get started. I considered some of my hobbies, be it tabletop games, video games, fictional literature, but I never actually got started. The most I would do is maybe put a comment or two under a video I liked or disagreed with. But today, I found a video that really just rubbed me the wrong way. This video, by Feminist Frequency, a channel that is most likely known for being led by Anita Sarkeesian, made a video titled White Supremacy, an American Tradition. Now, try as I might, I couldn't just hope the video was a historical documentary on racism in the past, because I just knew it was another group of do-gooders arguing about institutionalized racism today. I watched it. I disagreed with it. I commented on... No, wait a second. Comments are disabled, much like all the videos produced by these individuals. Well, it looks like I finally found something I can step out of the shadows and make a video about. Let's get started.
Hey everyone. As the whitest member of the Feminist Frequency team...
Oh joy, we're 4 seconds in and I can already tell this is some white guilt video about how everyone's racist because slavery happened. I'm sure this will be informative.
I wanted to start off this episode on white supremacy by saying something to my fellow white people out there. Given that many of our schools didn't exactly do the best job of teaching us about how white supremacy works and how it's woven throughout the history of our nation...
Honestly, I'd say that that's debatable depending on the part of history you're talking about, but go on.
A lot of us grow up with this sense of white supremacy as some kind of abstract problem, maybe even a thing of the past, and...
Honestly, it is. The thing about racism is that it really is a thing of the past. Sure, there are racists today. There are still people who want to identify as Nazis, too. But they are a minority. If you want to stop racism, stop talking about it. Let it die out, and stop inventing racism where it is not.
Certainly not our responsibility to solve today. So let me set the tone for where we're going here by saying that challenging, rejecting, and dismantling white supremacy is absolutely on us. We're the ones who unjustly benefit from it, and ultimately, we're the ones who can and must stop participating in and perpetuating the system.
Okay, the next part was their opening, but I cut that out. If you really want to see that, the link to the original video will be in the description.
Look, this short video is not meant to be an all-encompassing look at white supremacy. We just want to illuminate its existence and some of the ways that it functions in our culture today.
See, I'm not an expert on the psychology of making videos, but I feel like there was some kind of point to starting with an apologetic white person and then shifting to a black one. Maybe someone can enlighten me in the comments. I mean, hell, just look at the video tag. White people looking ashamed, black person trying to look awesome. Seems to set a clear tone for the video, and not exactly a good one.
I mean, the truth is, Ken Burns can unleash a 20-episode PBS documentary series about white supremacy. It'll still only scratch the surface.
My darling Lucille, it pains me greatly to know that I may never again see the sun rise on the Mississippi Delta and behold your beautiful face. Yet if I must lay down my life so that our children and grandchildren can continue to be slave owners and subjugate black people, why, then I do so gladly.
See, they don't really reference any facts or statistics, so I don't feel the need to either. Most of this is just going to be what I can remember from my high school and college history classes. You know, the majority of people who wanted to have slavery continue didn't own slaves. They weren't wealthy enough for it. They literally just wanted there to continue being someone lower on the totem pole than them. As stated by German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, the best consolation in misfortune or affliction of any kind will be the thought of other people who are in still worse plight than yourself. And this is a form of consolation open to everyone.
Let's take a super quick crash course through the history of American white supremacy. It's not something that just naturally existed. Basically, that stuff got imported from Europe along with smallpox, pilgrim collars, and calling the police on black people barbecuing in your general vicinity.
Okay, I must just not live in the right area, because I have never heard of that happening. I would need some facts and references to believe that last one.
White supremacy has always been a system of assumptions, actions, and regulations that rationalize a social order in which white people are positioned at the top because they are inherently smarter, more civilized, more righteous, you name it. From the very beginnings of the American experiment, white supremacy has excused the brutal, inhumane treatment of indigenous peoples and African slaves because whiteness is believed to confer a natural authority over other, lesser peoples.
I guess we're just gonna leave out the Irish.
In the early American colonies, the allure of white supremacy allowed the ruling class to drive an effective wedge between poor European laborers and African slaves. Although we should be careful not to conflate the status or experience of the two groups, the fact is that both groups were exploited by a wealthy landowning population.
Okay, credit where credit is due. If you recall, I did mention earlier how people didn't want to be on the bottom of the totem pole. At least they're mentioning that.
And that ruling class was justifiably concerned about the consequences if all the people at their mercy unified to rebel against them. So they granted poor whites certain social privileges that did nothing whatsoever to address the economic injustice they were suffering, but did cement their social position as higher than that of black people. This, coupled with false rhetoric about the inherent inferiority of non-whites, the savagery of American Indians, the low intelligence of black people, distracted poor whites from their justified outrage at the ruling classes. Things may not have improved for them, but they were no longer at the bottom of the social ladder, and they could feel smugly superior to anyone without white skin. The distracting ruse of the ruling class worked like a charm.
Time and again throughout American history, white supremacy has been reasserted both as a means of keeping people of color marginalized and of keeping poor whites angry at someone other than the rich, powerful white people who are taking advantage of them. By the time Richard Nixon was running for president, explicit racism was no longer as acceptable in American politics, but conservative politicians still wanted to appeal to their racist base, so they started relying on dog whistles, terms and issues that people understood as racist rhetoric, but that they could deny were racially motivated at all.
You start out in 1954 by saying by 1968 you can't say that hurts you, backfires, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites.
Under Ronald Reagan and his administration's racially motivated war on drugs, prison populations skyrocketed, and today, the U.S. has by far the highest rate of incarceration in the world, far greater than that of Russia, China, or Iran.
I assume those three were listed because they have larger populations than the U.S., so that would seem bad. But I was led to believe that the U.S. also has a longer sentencing for similar crimes to other countries, and also an increased likelihood of being sentenced, which would lead to a higher incarceration rate.
While statistically, the selling and use of illegal drugs is similar across all racial groups,
the word similar is a very bad choice to use in this situation. If we're going to talk about certain races being in prison more than others, then it really needs to be stated in cold, hard facts who is committing the crime more.
Black men are imprisoned on drug charges far more regularly than white men.
Do they commit the crime more often?
20 to 50 times more regularly in some states. At this rate, fully 1 in 3 young African American men will serve time in prison in their lives.
There are just too many reasons as to why that could be, and I don't want to rant about it, so I'll just say that I believe it's more of a cultural and an upbringing type of thing rather than racism in our judicial system.
This is not the result of a race-neutral or colorblind justice system. This is not simply the result of poverty, though the widespread imprisonment of black men absolutely functions to prevent them from escaping poverty. This is the result of a system designed to maintain white supremacy as a central component of American society.
You really need to provide at least some facts before you make that type of assumption. That is just insane, and I am sorry for anyone who actually believes that.
And with the openly racist Donald Trump in the White House,
given the amount of black people as well as people who voted for Obama that voted for him, I find it difficult to call him openly racist.
there isn't even a need to use coded language anymore. Like so many members of the ruling class before him, Trump knows that poor white people should be outraged at him. So he uses racist rhetoric.
What racist rhetoric? Where are the instances of him saying this? Can you please point them out?
In an attempt to make poor whites feel superior and afraid, as a way to try to keep them from seeing the truth, that they're being lied to and manipulated.
Once again, these type of claims need evidence if you want them to hold any water and be taken seriously.
We already touched on how the current American justice system is absolutely a tool of white supremacy.
I'm sure that's why there have been laws passed benefiting people who are not white.
And we highly recommend reading Michelle Alexander's incredible book, The New Jim Crow, to find out so much more about that.
I've not read the book, and sadly, based on these people supporting it, it really makes me doubt its factual accuracy.
But now, we're going to talk about other ways that white supremacy manifests itself and what it means to resist it.
From Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, when disaster strikes areas with large non-white populations, the government's response is grossly insufficient to meet the needs of residents.
I thought that was due to general incompetence and unpreparedness.
Now, the Three-Fifths Compromise way back in 1787 stipulated that black slaves were to be counted as 3/5 of a person. And it's obvious that even today, our government institutions don't view people of color as full human beings.
A wild accusation based in fiction, clearly.
And so many of the people in the arenas here, you know, were underprivileged anyway. This is working very well for them.
Yes! How nice for the poor black people whose homes have been destroyed and their communities ravaged. They get to spend some time at the Superdome.
First Lady isn't really a government position, last time I checked, so her thoughts shouldn't really pertain to the issue, should they?
The current estimated death toll from Hurricane Maria is over 4,600. Much of that attributed to the sheer failure on the part of the government to provide the necessary resources and support. Do you think the response to either of these crises would have been so lacking if the affected area was largely populated by white people? Spoiler alert, it wouldn't.
Based on what? The fact that so many people died is a horrible tragedy, but the fact that people want to use it to fuel a political platform is even worse.
Like other forms of oppression, such as misogyny,
Oh great, didn't think that was going to get brought in.
white supremacy in the United States is in no way natural. It was manufactured by slaveholding plantation owners and other members of the ruling class for a very specific purpose.
I wouldn't exactly say that white supremacy was manufactured. It more grew over time based on the fact that people were getting used to the fact that they owned other people. You will naturally see yourself as superior to something you own. We see ourselves as superior to cats and dogs because we own them. I'm not comparing slaves to cats and dogs. Just want to point that out.
But to so many white people who grow up in a culture that treats it as natural and normal, it can be invisible. Yet, the manifestations of white supremacy are everywhere we look, if we can just see clearly enough to recognize them. White supremacy is a president who calls the attendees of a racist rally very fine people, while condemning black athletes peacefully protesting against police violence. White supremacy is in that very police violence, as again and again and again, cops abuse and even murder black people and walk away scot-free.
It's actually a misconception propagated by political media that is often misrepresented for arguments such as this.
Darren Wilson, the police officer who murdered Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri on August 9, 2014, described the 18-year-old as a demon.
You're leaving out the part where he was part of a robbery. Not only that, was assaulting a cop and reaching for his gun when he was shot.
This is white supremacy, which tells white people to look upon black people with fear, as something more monstrous than human. In a piece for Slate about Wilson's testimony, Jamel Bowie writes, Wilson describes Brown as the Black Brute, a stock figure of white supremacist rhetoric in the lynching era of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. To the white public, the Black Brute was a menacing, powerful creature who could withstand the worst punishment. That image never went away. It lingers in crack-era stories of superpowered addicts and teenage super predators, as well as rhetoric around other victims of police brutality.
Like his absurd birther campaign, which attempted to make people perceive Barack Obama as an illegitimate president.
Okay, that one honestly did get on my nerves.
Trump's travel ban, his fear-mongering about Mexicans, his administration's crackdown on undocumented people.
Undocumented people. People who did not come here the legal way. In other words, criminals.
his caging of immigrant children as if they were animals, these are all manifestations of white supremacy. And remember, a significant part of the function of white supremacy is to distract poor whites from the economic injustice they experience, so that they're more likely to be angry at the immigrant who supposedly took their job than they are at the multimillionaire CEO who refuses to pay them a living wage.
There have been plenty of instances of people banding together and demanding higher pay, and it has been successful as well. I don't get how you can keep propagating all of this white supremacy bullshit.
The truth is, economic injustice and white supremacy are deeply intertwined throughout American history.
Sure, history. Now how about we leave it there?
And we cannot really talk about economic injustice without talking about racism too.
Economic inequality in the United States is currently at unprecedented levels and is only getting worse. And vast numbers of white Americans are kept in poverty as a result of it as well. But we can only really see the issue clearly by looking at it through a lens of race.
That is the most ridiculous argument I have ever heard.
Generations of slavery, followed by generations of Jim Crow, followed by generations of the racist war on drugs have left black families in particularly poor and precarious situations. Consider that in 2016, the median wealth for black families was $17,600, while the median wealth for white families was almost 10 times that, at $171,000. This is the result of white supremacy.
It could also be a result of what job they were working, how many hours they were getting, where they lived. There's just too many facts that you aren't including that could easily skew this away from your argument.
That itself works to reinforce and perpetuate white supremacy. As whites often falsely attribute these economic differences to laziness or poor choices.
The poor choices most often referenced, I think, are typically based around when someone with their pants around their knees, baggy clothes, and can't talk in proper English is wondering why they can't get a job.
And not what they actually are. The result of hiring discrimination, less access to stable, high-paying jobs.
Hiring discrimination is already illegal, so, not much more can be done on that front. And as for less access to higher-paying jobs, that kind of feeds back into my reasoning as to why their median income would be lower.
And less chance to build up wealth and pass it on to future generations.
James Baldwin wrote that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. White supremacy can be changed. It can be dismantled, but first, it has to be faced.
I'd like to think that it already was, but for some reason people just can't leave it in the past and have to keep bringing it up to justify modern problems.
That means recognizing it as a constant of this country's history that manifests in our economy, our law enforcement, our neighborhoods, our media, our federal institutions. It requires white people to stop blindly buying into the distraction and manipulation of it all, to actively resist participation in it, to stand with marginalized people, and demand racial and economic justice.
Well, that's the end of their video. Honestly, I think these people are idiots, and are part of today's victimization culture. There's no one keeping anyone down but yourself and circumstances. And by circumstance, I don't mean anything that is deliberate by another person. I mean, you don't get hired for a new job because your car breaks down before your first day starts. Sometimes bad stuff happens to good people, but it is not the result of institutionalized racism of any sort. And the sooner people can grasp that truth, the sooner we can all, as a whole, not as individual races or ethnicities, but as a whole people, move on. Now that's the end of all I have to say. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Leave any comments you have below. Constructive criticism is a must for me right now. If you thought this was worthwhile video to watch, then please hit the like button and you can consider subscribing. Hopefully I'll have another video out soon and get this ball rolling. I'll try to find more topics to commentate on, though if I see any suggestions in the comments, I will definitely give them consideration. With that, this is Alexander Leonhin. I'll be stepping back into the shadows.
Thank you.